Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shameer Sachdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. We're joined today by Aleks, Velev from Shameer, Influencer and Partnerships Manager. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to speak with you.
Let's start at the beginning. Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Bulgaria, and how I kind of got into influencer marketing, I was actually still at university. It was around 2016, and I was really researching into the social media space and trying to understand what brands are doing. It was at this point where I had to decide where I want to go with my career, what I want to do. It was right before graduation. I was actually working as a PR for nightclubs at the time. So that year I actually created a website that listed all the top clubs that students would visit every day of the week, because each one would have a better deal. And I went to them kind of advertising to them, list yourself on my website, have a promo redemption code and reward me based on the students that are coming in doing that. And that same year, I was on vacation in Spain, and I opened Indeed, or one of the websites that had job offers, and I saw that influencer marketing marketplace called Tribe are looking for an intern in London. At the time, I used to study in Scotland, in Edinburgh. So I applied for the job. I actually created a video CV to kind of differentiate myself from other candidates. And we had a visit to London actually with the university around that time. I passed through all the interviews, and within I think 2 months I was moving to London, and I was writing my dissertation while working at Tribe. And there a lot of the focus was around understanding sentiment on campaigns and how that can be packaged and then pitched back to clients on how campaigns can get improved. So as an upselling tool. So I was very much involved in the sentiment side of things and improving the reporting capabilities of Tribe. And after that, it was just a summer internship. So I left Tribe after, I believe it was 3 to 6 months. And the next step within influencer marketing was joining MGM Power, which is an influencer marketing agency. And I spent around 2.5 years there. During that time, worked with so I basically started my career there. And throughout that time, went from being coordinator to manager. So I was very much involved in the creation of strategies, also managing of campaigns internationally across multiple territories, from the UK to Spain to Russia to Mexico, all across the world.
Oh, wow.
And working with really cool clients. So when I started out, my first client was Zenly, which is an app that got acquired by Snapchat. I believe that now they're closing their offices and they're closing the business. But it was one of the first clients that I had, and did a campaign for them in Vietnam and then Taiwan afterwards. That was within a 1 year time frame. And afterwards, in 2019, worked with TikTok as a client. So I think we were one of the first agencies to work with TikTok. And then it was Deliveroo, Bumble, Starsplay. And then afterwards, I left MGM Power and joined another agency called Engage Hub, where I was head of influencer, and I was managing the influencer team. And during that time, worked with clients such as Gorillas and H&M. So Gorillas, the grocery delivery service.
Not us.
Not you guys. And and this year I joined Shares. So I joined Shares in July of this year. And as we spoke before we jumped on the podcast, that's my first time being on client side and first time being on platform side. So I've always kind of worked with apps before, worked with a lot of clients within the app space, not necessarily the fintech space. But now is the first time being on the other side.
How are you finding that transition from agency side to client side?
Yeah, I mean, so far I love it. My whole idea behind joining shares and moving on the client side was around like the idea of building and being there to build something that's going to last, something that's going to be there to help like build a huge brand and be there kind of like from the beginning to create and craft a strategy, to create an influencer strategy that's going to stay there for a long time and is going to become an always on program that's going to be there and people can afterwards take as a case study to apply afterwards into their businesses, like similar to, for example, what Gymshark have done with their ambassador program or with their influencer program. So that idea excited me a lot. I love the idea behind shares. It's something that I'm passionate about. It aligns with my values. And the idea of being at an early stage of a company like this that has the potential to absolutely explode was something that like I couldn't just miss on. Like it wasn't that I did not enjoy the agency side of things. I actually really enjoyed it. It was just like the opportunity was insane.
I've got a million and one questions to ask you. For a lot of our audience, influencer or influencer marketing even is somewhat of an unknown territory. Yeah. What did the first sort of 90 days or, the first 3 months or so at Shares look like for you? What did you do and how did you get your sort of influencer program up and running?
That's a very interesting question. So like even before that, like when I was speaking with our global director of growth, like I created an influencer strategy and a plan that was put in place. Like that was kind of like part of my interview process, like a pillar plan per like each platform and what we need to kind of like prioritize. And like my first 3 months were around like refining that and finding the right moment to show and like believe and start launching that. That was like really putting everything in place, like understanding which are the right creators we should work with, establishing those conversations. And that's in the UK, but also internationally. And really kind of like, I guess, breaking a bit of like preconceptions around how like a fintech startup or a finance company should do influencer marketing and like kind of like going in a completely different direction than what we did before.
What are your views on how fintech should be handling their influencer marketing?
I think like there's this preconception, I guess, that like every single fintech needs to work with a finance influencer of influencer in order to promote their brand. And that's the only direction to go. And that it needs to be kind of like very informative, heavy content that gets pushed on social. And that's going from YouTube to Instagram to TikTok, especially TikTok. And I'm not necessarily under that belief. I believe that like when working with finance influencers, it's great. It's definitely a direction that fintech startups should take. But when you actually think about the audience and you actually think about like what those creators are creating, first of all, each one of them are promoting every single one of your competitors and everyone like around the same like landscape as you. So like if you look at their promotional posts, they might not be as many as like a lifestyle creator or a comedy creator, but they are promoting your competitors 100%. Also, the content that they're going to create is going to be quite heavy and informative. Therefore, like, for example, if you're on TikTok, you want to be entertained. You want like really short, snap, quick content instead of like getting like an information overload of like the features of your app and like getting all that information to the users, because at the end of the day, you have only 3 seconds to hook the person to watch the content and then to take action from it. So that's another thing. And then when you think about it, like with shares, when we are engaging with finance creators, a lot of the audience that those finance creators have, they have already began their investment journey. They're somewhere along their investment journey. So they probably already have accounts in some of our competitors. So then it's a lot more of an action to convert those people to take action to move their funds from our competitors into shares or invest new money into shares instead of investing in some of our competitors that they have been investing with before. So then it becomes like a bit of a struggle. Like there's definitely value to that because there's validity of those creators. They're trusted. They understand the space. They're experts in the field. But in terms of if we're searching for conversions and growth, I wouldn't necessarily say that that is the best way to move forward because then you're competing in a very, very oversaturated space. And you have to understand a way to find a way with the finance creators to make your content stand out, which is something difficult because like most of their content is them sitting, talking in front of the camera and talking about certain stocks and educating their audience. I was even speaking with one person from Shares around like basically the trust in finance creators, and finance creators have a very strong trust with their audience on their non-sponsored content, but lower on their on their sponsored content, because at the end of the day, like they have this niche that they're promoting, and that's what they can promote. So like only a few companies within the space that are like within fintech, investment, etc., saving, can push their money into them and sponsor them. And then it becomes like less of a trust because they have like a smaller pool to take from than the creators.
When you're sort of planning out or looking for creators, you're stretching further than just the influencers and the specific ones. I mean, let's just use Shares as for example. What are you looking for in an influencer that would say, actually, this could be someone that could be appealing to our audience?
I think it's really important to look at tone of voice. I think it's really important to look at kind of what the creator stands behind, what is his audience. Obviously, like age demographic is really important to look at. Those are kind of like the standards things that you would look at, of course, like engagement rate, audience demographic, views, and that's at the baseline level. Then you would try to understand like sentiment, like how are people engaging with the content? Like, what are the comments that they're sending? Are they positive or are they negative? Because at the end of the day, there's also influencers that generate a lot of views, but their sentiment is negative and their audience is clowning them. So you wouldn't want to work with someone like that. Like, you need to have like a level of like due diligence checkup of like who the person is. And then it's understanding how strong their community is. Because there's influencers, I think, like a great example would be like the Sidemen or Beta Squad. Like they have like an amazing like relationship with their community, whereas where they promote something, people just jump on it. Like we see that right now with Prime, we see it with Sides, we see it with what Mr. Beast is doing as well. Like people, like they have like such an engaged audience that like the level of trust of their recommendations are huge. So if they align with the brand, you already know that they believe in that brand and they're aligning for it for a reason. It's not just a money exchange, which is something that should be looked at a lot when looking at influencer partnerships and looking at who to align your brand with, especially on a longer term basis. I think there's a good distinction to be made here. I think like there's different levels of influencer activity. There's the one-off or like 2-3 off where you're working with a few creators because you know they make good content, but there's no reason for you to bring them on an always on program and align yourself for a longer term basis. Obviously that's based on performance. Like they can bring amazing numbers and their audience can be extremely engaged and receptive to the content. And then you look at to bring them into the global always on kind of strategy. But when looking with creators to align for a longer term basis, the values need to be aligned. They need to believe in the brand. They don't necessarily need to believe in the brand initially, but they eventually need to become like real ambassadors of the brand and proponents of the brand and really use the product. Because at the end of the day, we are getting thrown so much information every single day, like so many ads that are inauthentic, that are just like, buy my product, install my app, do this, do that. Like the audience is able to sniff that, inauthenticity from a mile away. And I would always say like with influencer content, like I actually had a campaign now that I think it was a perfect example of this. Like for me, the content would go kind of like in 2 levels, like the good content. It would either be super authentic content that you're integrating your brand within the authentic content that the influencer would create and you integrate seamlessly. or you create something that's so insanely promotional, but in a funny way, the audience still like cares and it warrants like an attention. Because at the end of the day, like if the person is neutral when they see your ad, they failed. Like I would rather have like a very positive or a very negative reaction, because it's better than being in the middle and just completely not caring about the brand.
You talk about obviously creating long-term relationships. Do you see a benefit in having one-offs or 2, 3, 4 posts with a creator, or is that more just a case of assessing whether or not there is engagement and whether you can create something long-term, or is there specifically a place in your strategy just to do lots of one-offs with lots of different creators?
No, you always need to, like, I always look at it from like the level of like, I'm assessing performance and I'm assessing what works and what doesn't, what type of creator works, what type of niche works, what type of content works. And then afterwards, the idea is always to create like a roster of influencers, say you, like an ambassador program, that those influencers work with you on an ongoing basis. And then you're able to create like series of content or even like continuations of content on their channels. So that's always the idea. One-offs work to a certain extent, but there's a lot of added value in working with creators on a longer term basis, because then the level of trust you build with their audience is a lot higher than if you do like a one-off ad.
We recently did a podcast with our head of influencer marketing, and I mean, you've effectively echoed everything that she said, right? So, which is good to hear. I kind of want to talk a little bit about TikTok, and I think TikTok kind of deserves its own place in influencer, or they call them creators. And in my personal view, there's always been influencers on Instagram and YouTube, and even Twitter as well. But I think TikTok really kind of like unlocked that space and brought it front and center to a lot of brands. From your perspective, how important has TikTok been for, I suppose, your role, as an influencer marketer and for brands?
So like we do this kind of like ranking of like the platforms that are most important to us in terms of like communicating to our audience and where to focus on. And we actually rank TikTok number 1 currently. Like it's by far like the most important platform for us in terms of like acquisition and brand awareness and getting our name out there as well. I think it's huge and it's becoming bigger and bigger. I think like we've seen the evolution of the platform from 2018 until now has been absolutely incredible. And I think like with TikTok, like you can, with a lot less effort than YouTube, like long format content, you can create a very, very like strong impact in terms of like brand awareness and also conversions. I always put kind of like, if we're looking at Instagram Reels and TikTok content, I say that that's the funny, snappy, quick content that grabs attention. I say, for example, that YouTube is kind of like looking under the hood of the car. That's where you dive deeper. That's the content where you're going to dive deeper. With TikTok is, if a brand does it correctly, it could be extremely powerful. If a brand does it wrong, it could be quite bad. So it's one of those platforms that I think it's very easy to fail if you don't understand the algorithm, if you don't understand what type of content is consumed there. I think there's brands that try to be funny or try to push a challenge or try to do something and then it just doesn't work. So it's around like understanding like the way to create it.
There's a stat or something out there that says something along the lines that only 1 in 12 advertisers on Meta are actually advertising on TikTok. Mm-hmm. And I know from our customer base, there's been a bit of apprehension about advertising on TikTok as a fintech brand. What do you think the reasons are behind that?
I think one of the main things is age, right? I think like with TikTok, they have like a weird thing around like privacy and age. Like you don't know whether your content, the influencer content, is being seen by younger audiences. I know they're adding frameworks right now to kind of like mitigate that and to push content only to people that are 18 plus. And I think there's still like this level of like misconception that TikTok is only for like people that are teenagers or are like under 18s or are around like 18 years old, which has not been the case for years now. Now, like the main audience of TikTok is like between the ages of like 18 to 29. So it's not like the 15, 16-year-olds that was in 2018 and 2019. And I think brands are still at the idea that those are the type of people, like that's the audience that's on TikTok. And I think it's quite daunting for them to jump into this new platform and navigate it. So they choose to avoid it because Facebook advertising has been here for years and it has proven its efficiency. And obviously now, like it's been ages since Facebook purchased Instagram, but since like ads are like prominent on Instagram now, like you can kind of combine both and run both at the same time through one panel. And I think TikTok is something completely new to learn. And it takes time because it's its own beast. It's the content needs to look a specific way. There's like a way that the algorithm works, the way that the content is being pushed. For example, on TikTok, the way for content to reach virality, it's all based on the first hours. So like if you post within the first hour, if you receive 10,000 views, it's going to get pushed to 100,000. If you receive 100,000, it's going to get pushed to 1 million. And it's all within those hours, within like the comments, the shares that you receive. I think like with a lot of other like influencer content, the audience is able to see that content. With TikTok, the content is getting pushed on the discover page to different people. And it's all based on the engagement that you're receiving within those hours and the interests. So I think like understanding that TikTok was and is the most powerful platform to get views if you do the content right, because you don't even need that many followers to reach a larger scope of audience. And I think that's why working with creators on TikTok that are smaller, you can generate amazing numbers because you're not limited to the following. Instagram has that with Reels now, but before that they didn't. So it's all around like the algorithm. But brands are just probably looking at it as something completely different, something that they don't necessarily know how to navigate, especially fintech brands, because it's very difficult to package something that's very like kind of like informative and meaty in a TikTok video. It's difficult to find the narrative that you're going to create. It's easier to do it on an Instagram with a feed post.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the biggest barriers. I was talking to actually I was talking to TikTok earlier in the week, and I mean they're very, very aware of this, and they understand that one of the biggest barriers is content creation, and they've got a lot of initiatives to help users get started, and obviously naturally they're doing a lot with agencies as well. But I think like between those sorts of initiatives and the support that they're providing agencies, I can see marketing spend slowly shifting. I mean, we can see it shifting from Meta and starting to move over to TikTok. I don't think we're anywhere near sort of 50-50 just yet, but I think for TikTok, it's pretty much it's only going to go one way for them. Really, it's only upside.
With TikTok, the platform, like we've seen like major shifts in the platform, like in 2018 and 2019. I mean, I worked with TikTok as a client in 2019. Like that was a bit after they purchased Musical.ly and nobody had an idea what TikTok was. Like it was very, very early days. And we did a campaign with them in UK, France, and Germany and Spain as well, to kind of acquire new users there. And at the time, the content on TikTok was unbearable. Like it was just lip syncing videos. It was pranks. It was like nowhere near where the content is now, where it's entertaining. It's comedy. It's educational. It's all types of content. So the evolution of the platform from then until now is huge, and that's a testament to TikTok that their main marketing strategy was to attract an older audience and to scale up their audience as they were growing and as they were expanding, and they've done an amazing job at that.
I think the rise of TikTok is probably only second to Facebook itself, really, and it'll probably end up being the demise of Facebook the way they're going. You mentioned, obviously, TikTok ranks number one in your priority list. What about the other platforms? And what I'm curious in sort of understanding is, how do you adjust your content for the other platforms that are in your repertoire. So what are you doing different on YouTube? What are you doing different on Meta? What are you doing different on TikTok? Twitter even.
In terms of like Twitter, I don't touch Twitter with influencer marketing. To be honest with you, I think like the engagement rates are really, really low. So until that gets improved, I don't think that it's a platform that I would be focusing on anytime soon. I think in terms of like thought leadership, it could be quite powerful, but it definitely does not take priority in the strategy that I'm creating. In terms of Instagram, the strategy for Reels is quite similar to TikTok in terms of like the content that works and the content that should be created. The difference there is obviously like looking at the framework of pushing Instagram stories a lot more for conversion and pushing competitions across Instagram stories and in the comment section of Instagram in order to drive more awareness and to drive conversions also. So I think like that's one of the things that would differ a lot from TikTok. And then looking at YouTube, I look at it on a kind of like on two different pillars. I look at it on the way of on the one hand you have your fintech influencers, your finfluencers that are going to do product reviews. So they're going to look at under the hood of the car, but it's not going to be that promotional video where they can't critique the brand. I think that's a really important thing to like distinguish here because we were speaking about authenticity and in your face content. Like if an influencer is doing a product review for us, I want them to be honest and to say like where our shortcomings are and how we compare to like competitors in the space. And on the other end, it's integrations, working with like a commentary creator or working with a gaming creator and doing that on there. I think like gaming is a space that fintech brands should be looking at a lot more, and not just YouTube. I'm talking Twitch. I'm talking creation of tournaments, etc. Because like I think there's a lot of things to do there with like rewards and the audience is engaged. Like it's a live video. You're dealing with an audience that's not scrolling and tapping through their phones and just scrolling through their phones and their attention is all over the place. That audience is actually engaged. So if you do like those short bursts of like integration of your brand within that video or within that stream, or you do a competition where they need to take an action in order to be in that competition, then it becomes a great growth tool. So it's like then it goes around the conversation of like, is influencer marketing a brand awareness tool or is it a conversion tool? Well, it's both, but it's just about how you use it.
We get asked that question all the time. How do you justify your spend to the higher ups at Shares? And how do you demonstrate that, influencer marketing is adding to the bottom line?
So that's actually quite interesting because at Shares, I think we look at it in a very healthy way. And that was one of the things that when I was joining Shares, I had that discussion and I had the discussion around like influencer marketing is not a performance marketing tool. And if it is like, I'm like, if you guys believe that it is like, this is not really the right direction that I should be going. I think like with influencer marketing, it's used as brand awareness if it's posted organically on the influencer channel. If there's a competition at play, it is going to drive conversions, but those conversions are going to be limited. They're not going to be at the price point that a paid advertising campaign is going to be. Now, the interesting thing here is when the content is posted organically on the influencer channel, but then is used for paid advertising as well as Spark ads or used on Instagram or on Meta in general, then it becomes interesting because actually the creation of influencer content as paid adverts is cheaper than creating paid adverts sometimes. And it can work better because it's more organic. It feels like user generated content. So then like the conversion levels, I believe that Tribe actually had that research that paid adverts done by influencers convert 30% better than all other paid ads. So at Shares, like every single piece of content that we do on Meta or on TikTok, we utilize for paid advertising as well.
Just a second, that we've seen that as well. The other side of it as well is, to your point, production of the ad is actually a lot cheaper as well. We've got competitors as well, and there's another agency that was producing like really high quality ads. And frankly speaking, we were still relatively small at the time. And I was thinking, how am I going to compete with these guys to produce high quality videos. And in the end, the solution was UGC. We can pay a creator a fraction of the cost. They've got all the equipment. They coordinate it all for you. You basically give them the brief, and then they spit it out at the other end. And actually, I've got a really high quality ad that's actually more authentic and performs better. So
you don't need a production crew. You don't need like actors. You don't need to hire a studio. Like, it's none of that. Like, it can be shot in their house with the phone, edited, created, and then it just feels authentic. It feels relatable.
What's sort of your process for content ideation, really? How do you operate with your creators, with your influencers? Are you very prescriptive in terms of what you want from them? Do you just leave it up to them and you give them a high level brief? What's your approach?
I'm not very prescriptive. Like, I've written like really prescriptive briefs where it's like, this is what you do. This is the campaign. This is the campaign creative. Like, go with that. Like, I've done that before in my career. That's not the direction that I take now. The direction that I take now is a lot more around like narrative. This is the narrative that I want to come across from the video, whether it's TikTok. Like, it's like 3 points or like 3 key messages that need to come across. I create a script in a way where it's just an idea and the creators don't need to follow that idea, but it's just an example of how that messaging can be incorporated within the content. Then that's being sent over to the creators and a discussion is had around like what they want to create, what feels authentic to them. And then I work in the way of them sending over scripts for me to review before shooting the content, because that's an amazing way to avoid like reshooting or any miscommunication. And it's just finding a way for the brand like to be incorporated in the best way possible in the content, to have like a seamless integration where like the content is enjoyable for the influencers' followers and they watch it as if they're going to watch any other piece of content that's actually not sponsored.
I suppose as part of what you're doing, in order to get the best from your creators and your influencers, it's establishing rapport and relationships. How do you go about doing that at Shares? Do you have any sort of specific sort of events or programs or anything that you do to try and sort of help manage those relationships and support your partners?
It's something that's coming along. It's something that you're currently kind of like planning on doing, and as well as that creating like influencer events. It's not something that we necessarily have in place now. I've been fortunate enough to have worked in the industry for a while, so I do have like already pre-existing relationship with a lot of creators, a lot of talent agencies. But it's always great to, meet someone in person and engage with them and, have a conversation, throw a few ideas about like how you can work together in the future. And that's something that I do a lot of, kind of like networking with creators, networking with talent agents and other agencies in order to kind of like, first of all, put a like face to the name, of course, but also like exchange ideas and see what they're passionate about, what they're excited about, and what their perception of the brand is. That's one way to kind of like build rapport and build those relationships.
Sort of more focused a little bit more on your role. Obviously, coordinating and orchestrating pretty complex campaigns means that obviously, you yourself need to be sort of at the top of your game. And if anyone who's listening has been on TikTok, and I'm hoping that you have, one thing that we all know is that there's always a new trend popping up, and there's something new popping up. What do you tend to do to make sure that you are staying ahead of trends, firstly? And I suppose second of all, how do you allow Shares to lean into those trends as well and take advantage of them?
So like, how do I stay on top of those trends? Like, one of the good things is that I am within the age range of our actual consumer and like our target audience. So like the content that I consume normally would be the content that someone my age would consume. So like the content that I would watch on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube is content that people my age are going to watch and listen to. I take extra effort to watch content that's outside of that scope in order to inform myself, whether that's like different hashtag challenges on TikTok, different trends, in order to inform myself better on what's happening on the platform. I'm actually not a big fan on piggybacking off trends, to be honest. Like, it's not something that I necessarily do with the influencer strategy. I think it's something that is quite powerful when we do it with our social strategy and what our social and content team do. But for the influencer strategy, it's not something that I necessarily lean heavily into, because I feel like when brands jump on influencer content with challenges, if they haven't created that challenge, that's normally not the best way to go about it. I would rather go in the direction of working on content formats that have been there for a while and have stayed there for a while and are successful, rather than jumping on like a trend that's on there and trying to incorporate the brand within it. I think that's quite a difficult thing to do. If we're taking a trend that's like very general and it requires a specific action, and then you need to plug your brand into it, it would feel quite inauthentic. So I would rather focus on content formats, like, for example, like skit comedy videos, where like the creators plays like different characters and there's like a script around it. That works a lot better than focusing on like a specific challenge that's happening at that time. Of course, if it's something like very closely interlinked with what we're doing at Shares, for sure it would be worth looking at. But in general, it's not something that I would recommend to go in the direction of like, oh, there's this hashtag challenge, or this is going viral right now, and let's go in that direction. I think like that could be something quite powerful with memes. I saw, like, for example, like now with Pete Davidson, like I saw that Lyft did a tweet around that, like, get her a Lyft or Pete Davidson will, or Delta Airlines were get her a holiday or Pete Davidson will. Cool. That's a cool thing to kind of like piggyback on, but that could be done a lot more with like meme accounts and amplify it in that way.
I was just thinking about the day in the life of trend that went around. And I'm pretty sure that the day in the life of someone at Twitter probably was single-handedly responsible for Elon Musk firing 75% of the company.
Yeah, I mean the day of a life of like a Gen Z working in Silicon Valley is like the maddest thing. Is like grab a coffee at 9, open my emails at 11, and then go to a Zumba class at 1 to 3.
Day in the life of, and it's like there was no work getting done at all whatsoever. Yeah. It got quite a bit of it got quite a bit of critique on Twitter itself, actually. It occurred to me that we talked about the reluctance of fintechs getting onto TikTok, but funny enough, we didn't talk about fintechs embracing influencer marketing. We're seeing more and more fintechs getting interested in the influencer space. But I mean, comparatively, only a fraction of brands are actually doing it. What do you think the biggest blocker is for them, getting involved in and starting to test out influencer?
A few things. I think compliance is one of the things. Obviously, like creating content that's compliant and ensuring that you're touching all bases in order to not be in any violations. It's something that each fintech brand needs to navigate, and it could be quite daunting and a bit risky in a way. So I think like a lot of brands are trying to stay away from that. I think that's the one thing. But I think more importantly than that is brands looking at it from a way of like, we're not going to achieve a massive lift in new consumers by working with influencers in the short term. So it's just kind of like looking at it from a very short-term, low-hanging fruit basis of like pushing paid ads or pushing CRM, pushing push notifications instead of like, I mean, also incorporating influencer marketing, right? Because all of those things work. They're kind of like tried and tested, but it's looking influencer marketing of like, oh, we're actually not going to achieve a massive spike by doing a one-off influencer campaign. Why even try? Whereas influencer marketing is something that you need to invest in on a longer term basis in order to really see that value of putting your brand name out there, but also achieving like a spike in customers and like growing your brand. So I think that's the two things that are really preventing fintech brands from going into it. And I think it's just like the lack of understanding. I like when I joined the influencer marketing industry in 2018, it was that every time that you would speak with a brand, you need to go through this educational process of explaining to them what influencer marketing is, what influencer marketing does, what influencer marketing is not as well. And I think the fintech companies are now at this stage. So like a lot of like brands that are consumer brands, that are fashion brands, they got like really educated about this. And a lot of apps got educated around this as well. And I think now the fintech industry is in that early stage of like, okay, like we should get on this, but we don't exactly know how because we don't know exactly how to package it. Because a lot of fintech brands are not necessarily like what you would traditionally call sexy, right? So just like, oh, we're not that. So how are we going to do influencer marketing? How are we going to make it fun? There's definitely ways to do it, but it's just around like understanding how.
What we kind of saw from our side, and I, again, mentioned this before we sort of clicked the record button, was, and this was kind of the start of our journey. Obviously, we saw, an uptake in influencer, and so we wanted to build out our own team behind it. And when we were sort of making our first hires, my view is that, influencer and affiliate were incredibly close aligned. But then after obviously starting to speak to affiliate marketers, what I realized was that they didn't really know anything about influencer. And then when I spoke to influencer marketers, what I realized was that it's almost the polar opposite of affiliate. It's not performance based. And I think the term influencer is, arguably the wrong word for it. It's more about brand ambassadorship than it is influencers or creators. Personally, I think it's, probably the one way that smaller brands, not just fintechs, can create brand awareness with their audience at arguably a low cost, capital cost anyway.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point around like, you mentioning that you would rather like call them brand ambassadors and obviously working with influencers on a longer term basis. I think what brands need to do is think of first of all, when influencers are creating an advert, you should see them kind of like as a creative director, and you should use them for their creativity because that is what they do for a living. They're able to come up with creative concepts and you should include them in the process. And brands should always think about this idea of like, how can I bring an influencer to a point of like co-creation? I think some brands have done this like really well where like influencers have had like even feedback on the brand itself. And I think like eventually with the brand ambassador program, it's kind of like building that level of having like a few brand ambassadors that really have a say in the business, in the product, of like what they believe the direction should be.
Yeah, I think it's one of those sort of cases where terminology probably needs a slight adjustment, but I think we're so far into using the word influencer, I think it's probably too late to change that. Aleks, I mean, for me, this has been a fascinating conversation, and truthfully, I could probably talk about this for a whole other hour. To kind of wrap up, before we kind of hit our quick fire round, what would be your words of wisdom to a CMO at any fintech, that's looking to embark upon on influencer marketing?
I mean, I think the main thing is like, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to try. Like, jump in the fire. Like, trial by fire. Like, understand what influencer marketing is. Like, see what your customers are like talking about. See who they follow, and then go from there on who you want to work with. And don't just delete the whole concept of influencer marketing just because you don't know how to do it.
Great advice. Let's jump into our quick fire round. What podcasts are you listening to at the moment?
There's a few, right? Like if we're going into business space, I think like The Diary of a CEO is like my number one. Like that's the podcast that I listen to the most, and I think is the one that gives me like the most value. I think like there's a few other podcasts like The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes, which is one that I've listened to since I was in university. And also Impact Theory by Tom Bilyeu is one that's really, really cool because it's always like a lot of different guests, like interesting guests, like adding a lot of value. So those are three of the podcasts that I would like put in the kind of like self-development business kind of sphere. And then for like entertainment purposes, like I do love Joe Rogan. I love the Joe Rogan experience.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the Joe Rogan experience. It's probably like with The Diary of a CEO, that's like my other favorite podcast. And I also do watch Impulsive. I watch Logan Paul's podcast as well. Even though I wasn't a fan before, like with the whole like scandals and things like that. But he has definitely gotten a big redemption arc since then. So I think those are like a few of the podcasts that I listen to.
Amazing. What books are you currently reading at the moment?
So I'm quite guilty of always buying books and then like not reading them from cover to cover and kind of like dropping them. I actually have a book here on my counter. So this is what I'm reading right now. The Upstarts. It's about Uber and Airbnb and their story. It's quite interesting because it goes into like how they started and how they grew. And I think like the last few months, I've kind of like really dug into the loophole of looking at WeWork story and Uber story. I actually watched the WeWork series We Crashed, which was amazing, like highly recommended. It's pretty cool. And now I'm watching the Uber one as well. So this is what I'm reading right now. I'm reading into nonfiction, kind of like books like this. I'm not really into fiction. Fiction helps me relax, but these books kind of like make me think, and I like reading books like that. I'm also like one of my favorite authors is Ryan Holiday, who wrote Obstacle is the Way and Ego is the Enemy. He writes a lot around like Stoic philosophy. He has the book called The Daily Stoic. So that's like one of my favorite books because you can really relate it to your life and how to deal with certain situations and remaining present, but also understanding that nothing is fatal and only death is fatal, right? Like everything else like that you go through your day is like minor inconveniences, and it's like to keep a peace in mind. That's one of the things that's helped me most in my career, to be honest.
Other than Shares, what's your favorite fintech app?
I found that question very difficult because I'm not like, I actually don't use that many fintech apps. You know what? Like I find really cool. Sweatcoin is like a really cool idea because I really like the idea of getting rewarded for like activity. I think it helps in for like health, but also to redeem certain things. I wouldn't like necessarily identify them as a fintech. I know they have like a crypto side of the business as well. So I really like the idea. And as well as that, I love Monzo as well. Like absolutely love Monzo. I think that their branding is really cool. I think that the way they do their marketing is really cool. And like those are two that I absolutely love.
What's the best bit of life advice you've ever received?
Aim for the moon. If you don't reach it, you'll still be one of the stars. I think like I got that when I was like really, really young, and it kind of like stuck to me. It's like always kind of like aim high, and even if you come up short, you still be okay.
Yeah, I like that. That's one of my favorite ones as well. And then lastly, what's one thing that I haven't asked you that perhaps I should have?
Who inspires me? Who I learn from? I think that's a good question to ask.
Tell me who inspires you? Who do you learn from?
I asked that question and then I don't have the answer for it. Like, so who inspires me would be my mother, like 100%. I think like I've learned like the most from her, and like the way she's handled like obstacles in her life, and like what she's taught me is absolutely like invaluable. Who inspires me? I wouldn't say like inspire necessarily, but like I love to see what people in the industry and like my peers are doing and like learning from them and looking at like different viewpoints. Like I think it's a really exciting time in the industry. I think like someone like Stephen Bartlett is someone that I look up to. I think what he's doing is amazing, like with his businesses, with kind of like even him leaving social chain and now pivoting into like a different space. Like the way he's developed his platform is really, really exciting. As well as him, there's like amazing people in the industry that are just like absolutely crushing it. So it's just like looking at what they're doing and trying to extract learnings and adapt them to what I'm doing, because everyone has like their own style of doing things.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to see how people like package information, how they see certain things.
Amazing. Aleks, thank you very much for coming on today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely loved it. And hopefully the conversation is valuable to the audience. I really, really enjoyed it.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.